month, I turned 30 years old. Me. I'm 30. If you were to ask me how old I was, my automatic response is 17. That was 13 years ago. That was nearly half my life ago. I am a 30-year-old adult. I'm supposed to be a 30-year-old adult. That just doesn't make sense to me. But you know what? After years of dreading my 30th birthday, I genuinely thought I was going to hit 30 and just have a mental breakdown. I've been so scared about this big number with the 3 in front of it. But since turning 30, I actually feel this weird sense of peace. It's a new decade. I've got so much life ahead of me. There's so many things I still want to do. And I don't feel old. I don't feel like an adult. Does anyone ever feel like an adult? What does being an adult even mean? Because I still go out on a Friday night and drink and be feral and be crazy and not get back in till 3 in the morning. Granted, now I only do that at gay clubs. That is one big thing that's changed in my 20s. I've not stepped foot in a straight club in many years, but a gay club, I'm still there. I can do it. I might be 30 years old and my feet might really, really hurt and I might have a terrible hangover the next day, but I'm still doing it. And that is life as a 30-year-old. I went off on a tangent there. I didn't mean to say any of that. But you know what? Bringing it back round to the concept of this video, you know what my greatest joy in my 30 years on earth has been? Books. Genuinely, and I'm not even just saying that because this is a book channel and I talk about books. Books have brought me so much comfort, so much joy in all the times I've needed them. And so today I thought I would do a video where I talk about the 30 books that defined me in my 30 years of life. I didn't come up with this idea. I saw somebody do this on TikTok, but I did not like it, nor did I favourite it, so I have no idea who it was. But credit where credit's due. I just don't know who the credit is going to. Do you have any idea how hard it was to narrow my life down to 30 books? The 30 books that have meant the most to me in my life. I started this with a list of 50 books that I've read in the last 6-7 years. And I was oh, but what about all my childhood books? What about all the books I read when I was a teenager? And honestly, this is a very, very narrowed down list compared to what I wanted to talk about. But I think these are all the really important ones. I'm just going to move myself to this side so I can do a bit of fancy editing where all the books come in here because I actually don't have all the physical books from my childhood. Crazy, I know. But the first book I want to talk to you about today is, of course, a Roald Dahl book. I was such a Roald Dahl kid. I have read every single Roald Dahl book that has ever existed. I had all the anthologies, I had all the poems, I literally had everything. When I was 4 or 5 years old, my dad used to read me Roald Dahl books to go to sleep. They mean so much to me, and I had to really look over all of his books to figure out which one really meant the most to me as a kid. And the Roald Dahl book that I just couldn't not talk about is Georgia's Marvellous Medicine. This book, I feel, is so crazy underrated. Out of all the Roald Dahl books out there, why has this one never had a TV show or a movie? Because I just adored this book so much. I've always had this thing with potions and making I trained as a barista when I was 18 and it is literally one of the best things ever. I love making cocktails. I love cooking. I love putting different things together and seeing what they can make. I spent my entire childhood in the bath making potions, or in the garden making potions, and I feel it's because of this book. So in George's Marvellous Medicine, he lives with his grandma, or he's staying with his grandma, and his grandma is not a nice woman. He doesn't like her at all, and she's quite ill. 4 times a day she has to take this medicine. So one day George decides to make his own medicine for his grandma that he is going to feed her. So he goes through the entire house and takes anything that could be put into a potion. He goes into the shed, he takes anything out of there, and he basically makes this big concoction of everything, but literally everything in the house. And it turns out this concoction he's made is a bit magic. He starts feeding it to the animals and they grow and they explode or they shrink, and it was just so fun. I had so much fun reading this one as a kid, and my dad used to read it to me, and George's Marvellous Medicine, everyone calls me George, it's cute. I'm going to have to really try and make these overviews a bit more concise because otherwise this video is going to be so long. But there's so much I want to say about so many of these books, so I haven't thought about them in so many years. I had to include Jacqueline Wilson on this list. When I was growing out of Roald Dahl, the next era of my life was Jacqueline Wilson. I read every single one of her books that she put out probably until about 2010-ish, I would say. I read them all, I loved them, and I had to choose 2 books for this video, and the 2 I've chosen are Lola Rose and Cat Mummy. I remember Jacqueline Wilson books making me feel so grown up because they covered really like adult topics, like topics that no other kids book would want to touch on. And Lola Rose was, I think if I was to reread Lola Rose now, I'd probably be quite shocked at the subject matter. But if I remember correctly, it's about a girl called Janie, and she is living in an abusive household with her mum, dad and brother. And then one day her mum, brother and Janie all just have to escape this horrible household. And they kind of like go on the run. They start living in a hotel. They have to come up with fake names, fake identities, and Janie chooses the name Lola Rose, which she sees as this really like glamorous, fun character for her to play. So she's going through life living as this like glamorous character, but of course there's really dark stuff going on behind the scenes that Janie, Lola can't really get a grasp on. And I remember this book, like, I read it for the first time and it shocked me so much that I immediately like read it again. And I read it so many times. I wish that I'd kept all my Jacqueline Wilson books from when I was a kid. I remember I had this one in hardback, and I remember the hardback like literally falling off, like the cover falling off, because I read it so much. I felt so grown up reading this book and being allowed to read this book. And then of course The Cat Mummy. This is another one where the subject matter is just like probably not quite appropriate for a kid, but Jacqueline Wilson wrote anyway. Our main character is Verity, and she has got this old cat called Mabel who she loved so much. She was like her mum's cat, then her mum died and she was being raised by her grandmother. And one day she finds Mabel dead in her wardrobe, and Verity at the time is studying ancient Egyptians in school. And so she gets the wonderful idea to mummify Mabel so she can like keep her with her forever. And it follows Verity as she attempts to mummify her cat. And there's a very this scene has stuck out in my mind my entire life, where it's like getting the coat hanger and like putting it out with the cat's brains. Have I made that up? I might have made that up. But in my head, there is a scene in the book where that happens. I really need to reread all the Jacqueline Wilson books. Maybe that's a good video idea. Maybe I should do that. But that's a really good segue into the next books I want to talk about, and that is the Horrible History series. Oh my god, I was obsessed with Horrible Histories as a kid. I'm not talking about the TV show. Like, the TV show is kind of like after my era. I read the books, and I read every single one. I remember for Christmas one year my mum getting me like the box set with every single Horrible Histories book in it, and I was thriving. I was living my best life. There are a few which like stand out. There was the Blitz Brits, which was about the Blitz in Britain during World War II. There was the Terrible Tudors, the Perilous Plagues. Like, that is where my obsession with the Black Plague comes from, like the Perilous Plagues book. I read these during such a formative time in my life, and genuinely Horrible Histories are the reason why I've got such a fascination with history. And what other ones were there? Vicious Victorians. There was Awesome Egyptians, or like Amazing Egyptians, or Awful Egyptians, something along those lines. I love those books so much. Again, I want to reread them. Like, making this list really made me want to like get out all my childhood books and read them all again. Okay, the next series I want to talk about, we are going to brush past really fast, but I just couldn't not talk about this series because it really was such a pivotal part of my life, and that is, of course, the Harry Potter series. These are all my Harry Potter books. They live down here, and you can see how well these books are read. Like, I just couldn't not talk about them. I'm not going to talk about the author, she who shall not be named, because I thoroughly disagree with any of her thoughts and feelings and generally her existence. That was me. But you get what I'm saying. These books just meant so much to me. I queued up outside Waterstones at like 4 a.m. to get this book when I must have been like 9 years old. And I read it in one day. I read this entire book in one day. I just wish the author hadn't had to ruin what was such an incredible legacy, because these books, they still mean so much to me. Like, look, I read my name in it. Oh, I was so cute. A Series of Unfortunate Events by Lemony Snicket, another book series that I loved so much. I think I read the first 5 books like in one hit, and then I had to wait for the rest as they like came out. I would literally send my mum to the bookshop on the day of release to get the books for me because I loved them so much. I think that was probably my first toe into like the darker side. Like, up to this point, most of the books I've read have been like historical, like generally lighter, but Series of Unfortunate Events, like, it's undeniably a lot darker. It's about the Baudelaire orphans. There's 3 children, their parents died, and they're sent to live with their sort of distant uncle, Count Olaf, who only wants them for the money, so he is plotting to kill them. And it follows these 3 orphans, Violet, Sunny, Klaus. It follows Violet, Klaus and Sunny as they're basically running from Count Olaf, and there's 11 books in total, and oh my god, again, I want to read these ones again. Okay, this is going to be a whole book series. We're going to come back around to this probably in the next year or so. I'm going to reread all my favourite books from childhood. I didn't realise how many book series I had in this video, but growing up a little bit, The Princess Diaries by Meg Cabot. I loved the books way before the movie ever came out. I just loved these. I feel like I felt a bit more grown up. I remember in one of the later books, maybe like book 5 or 6, there is a scene in which like Mia is talking about like losing her virginity to Michael. And I remember reading that, like, oh, scandalous, like, I can't believe I'm reading this. Like, I'm 12 years old and I'm reading about sex, like, what? And I just, yeah, I felt so grown up. Another series, the Angus Thongs and Full Frontal Stalking series by Louise Renison, the Georgia Nicholson series. Again, I just felt so grown up reading these books, and literally, I like loved how they felt like I was reading a diary. I loved that the main character was called Georgia, because no main character was ever called Georgia, and she was just like awkward and odd, and I was awkward and odd at the time I was reading this, but obviously she got the guy in the band and she ended up not being all that weird, but like I just loved this series so much. I think I really struggled with friendships as a teenager. Like I had like 3 good friends, but we like weren't in the same classes together or anything at school, so a lot of the time I felt like really lonely. So I really like to escape into the lives of other teenagers, like who lived completely separate lives from mine. I think that's why I sort of love this sort of like genre of book so much. Okay, now we're reaching the era of my life where I actually started to keep all of my books. I don't know what happened to all my childhood books. I literally had 2 of those IKEA like Kallax shelving units, like the massive bookcases. I had 2 of those in my bedroom, full to the brim with books, and I don't know where any of them have gone. I need to talk to my mum. I don't think she still has them. But the first book that I actually have is this one, if it wants to come out. Private Peaceful by Michael Morpurgo. I read this during school. I don't know if it was like GCSEs or just like year 9, but I remember reading this book for the first time and being like gagged. Like I could not believe what I was reading. I've always had a fascination with the wars, World War I and World War II, probably thanks to Horrible Histories. And this book is set during World War I. Our main character here is Thomas Peaceful, Private Thomas Peaceful. And he is too young to go off to war, but he goes anyway to follow his older brother. And this book is a countdown. I'm not going to spoil anything, don't you worry. But each chapter is like a different time. So like 5 past 10, 20 to 11. I've written like numbers on all the corners, so I don't really know why. What have I done? I don't know. So it's like a countdown. 3. I think I've just like numbered the chapters. Maybe it was because I was studying at school, it was easier for me. And Tomo's basically recounting his life in each chapter, and you're counting down to something, you know something's going to happen, your heart's like in your chest, and it's incredible. It is such a beautiful book, and it is so short as well. This is literally like 184 pages, and it's left such an impression on me. Like imagine being such a talented writer, you can write 184 pages of a book, like that is it, and it sticks with somebody for life. Like what? Michael Morpurgo also wrote Warhorse, by the way. And then I read A Swift Pure Cry by Siobhan Dowd. I read this during a book club at school. Georgia, why were you weird in school? Why did you not have many friends? Because I was one of 4 people in book club. We would meet in the library once a week and we would read books. That was me in school. This is set in Ireland and it's based around a teenager called Shell. I think she's about 15 years old, and her mum's died. Her dad is this alcoholic, like religious fanatic, and she is basically left to care for her entire family, but she's like in a deeply Catholic part of Ireland, obviously, and she never receives any sex education. Nobody ever talks to her about like periods or anything like that. And so Shell finds herself pregnant, and then she finds herself at the centre of this scandal that rocks the entire village that they live in. Like, she is the centre of everything. Horrible things are going down. Again, I don't want to spoil anything, but this book made me sob. The first time I read it, I was so shocked. I think I read it, I must have been about 15. I was reading about 15-year-old Shell, and like I was thinking about our lives like in parallel to each other, and oh my god, it was beautiful. The next book is Girl Missing by Sophie Mackenzie, and I don't think I actually have a copy of it anymore. Do I? It'll be here somewhere. No, I don't. But Girl Missing is the first ever like psychological mystery thriller book that I ever read, and it is that book that got me hooked on the genre. That book to me is the blueprint. Like, that was another book that I remember finishing and like immediately just going back to the first page and starting it again, because I was like, I want to see everything I missed. I want to pick up on all the clues. In Girl Missing, I can't remember what the main character's called. I can't remember. I've written notes, but not that good notes. The main character basically finds out that she was kidnapped as a baby, or like she sees a photo of like this child online and she's like, oh, that looks exactly like me as a kid, and then she goes to find out that that is her, like she was kidnapped as a child. So who on earth are the people that have raised her for the last like 15 years of her life? Dun dun dun. It's so good, and I think if I read it now I'd probably be like, oh, it's not that good, like it's fine. But reading that for the first time as like a 15-year-old, oh my god, mind blown. I thought it was just the best thing since sliced bread. Baby's first classic, Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. If I was being really pretentious, I would have included this like earlier in the video, because this is obviously in chronological order, because I first read this when I was like 10 or 11 years old, but I don't think I really like grasped the intricacies of this story until I studied it for GCSEs when I was like 15, 16. Yes, I read Pride and Prejudice when I was like 10 years old. I had a very advanced reading age as a kid, which sounds like something that so many people say. I suppose it probably is true for a lot of people. All I did was read, probably because I didn't really have any friends and I was just a weirdo. I remember my year 6 teacher calling my parents to a meeting and being like, I don't know what to do with her because she has read every book that's ever existed ever. Like, any book that we study in class, she's just bored because she's already read it and she already understands it. In class at the time, we were studying The Secret Garden, which I'd already read like so many times. And so my teacher gave me a copy of Pride and Prejudice and made me sit in the back of the classroom and read it. And read it I did. I don't know if it was this version. This version has obviously been incredibly well read over the years. But this is my annotated version, so I guess this is from my GCSE years. So many notes. I had so many thoughts about this book. But then I reread it when I was 15 for GCSEs, and I just adore this book so much. I must admit I haven't read it in many, many years because I love the 2005 Pride and Prejudice movie featuring Keira Knightley, of course, and now when I get like a Pride and Prejudice craving, I just watch the movie instead of reading the book. But maybe I do need to read it again because I adore this one so much. Whilst on the classics hype, another book, I think we read this one for my A-level, so I must have been like 17-ish. Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. For years, if you would have asked me what my favourite book was, I would have said this book. Again, I know I've mentioned it a lot, the fact that I didn't really have many friends and I was just very socially awkward. Like, I'm not trying to make you feel sorry for me, it was just like the reason that I read so many books when I was a child and teenager. I feel like I really connected with Frankenstein's monster in this book because he just felt like a bit of an outcast and he just didn't really belong anywhere, and I very much felt like that, especially during like sixth form when I would have been studying this book, because I did not have a very good group of friends, and in hindsight I was definitely bullied. I didn't feel bullied at the time, but in hindsight, looking back at it, I was like, oh, I was, they were horrible to me, like I was bullied by them quite badly. But I remember reading this book at the time and just being like so touched by Frankenstein's monster and just feeling like I was the monster. Oh my god, so many notes. I literally had so many thoughts and feelings. A series I definitely should have mentioned earlier in the video is Uglies by Scott Westerfeld. The Uglies series is so good and nobody talks about it, but I did find out recently that they're finally making it into like a TV show or a movie. Like, Netflix are doing something with it, and all I can say is about time, because I've been screaming for this for like the last 16 years of my life. Like, Uglies is such a good dystopian series. If you like the Hunger Games, Maze Runner, Divergent, like things like that, you will love Uglies. I just don't understand why it never quite like reached the same levels as those books. In Uglies, it's basically set in a dystopian world in which when you turn 16, you have this surgery that turns you from an ugly into a pretty, and like the uglies are like the outcast of society, and when you become a pretty, that's when like your life really starts, and like beauty is essentially currency. And our main character in this, did I write down a note? Tally. Our main character is Tally, and she's like coming up to her 16th birthday. She's really excited for the operation, and then her friend Shay kind of like opens her eyes as to why the operation might not be a good thing, and so they run away and they basically like live on the land. There's 3 books in the series, I think. uglies, pretties and specials. And yeah, if you're looking for a good dystopian series, I would highly recommend it. It is written for like a young adult audience, but I still think it's amazing. And talking of the Hunger Games, obviously the Hunger Games are being featured in this video. I did not get on the Hunger Games hype for so many years. Like, I was so late to the party. I literally think I read it after the first movie had already come out. I was just such a Harry Potter stan. I was like, no other series are gonna like match up to that. I'm not reading the Hunger Games. I still to this day have never read Twilight. But I read it and I was obsessed with it. I think I read all 3 books. Is it 3 books? Yeah, 3 books in like a weekend. I remember going to like a cabin holiday with my friends at the time and sitting on the sofa, and they were like, Georgia, we're going for a walk. Do you want to go for a walk? And I was like, no, I need to finish this book. And I remember sitting on that sofa finishing Mockingjay and being like, what? Just blows my mind. And still now I think those books are incredible. And I actually remember thinking at the time, I was 18, so it was like 12 years ago, like, this is supposed to be dystopian, but it doesn't feel dystopian to me. Like, it feels like it could happen in real life. And I remember commenting that to a friend. And then as each year goes past, I'm like, oh yeah, Hunger Games. It is approaching. It is coming. Okay, I've got to talk about at least one John Green book in here, and the chosen one is Paper Towns. I don't think this is one of the most popular John Green books, but I adored this book. Like, it's got mystery, it's like got romance, it's YA, it's got everything in one. Our main character is Quentin. He's always been kind of like creepily in love with his neighbour Margot, but Margot has never really given him the time of day. I have adored the name Margot ever since reading this book, by the way. Like, it's not Margot Robbie, that's my influence, it is this book. Margot has been my #1 kid's name for so many years, but that's by the by. Quentin is obsessed with Margot, and then one day Margot just like turns up in his bedroom and then the next day disappears, and Quentin thinks that Margot's basically left him this like trail, like this treasure hunt to follow to find her, and so he follows this treasure hunt and things aren't all as it seems. Give me a book with like a good treasure hunt in it, I'm all there. Oh, when the movie came out and Margot was being played by Cara Delevingne, I was like in the height of my Cara Delevingne obsession, like when I was like figuring out that I was gay. I think that very much lends to my love of the book. Of course, I can't not talk about Carol by Patricia Highsmith. I don't have a physical copy because I lent it to my friend and I never got it back. I really need to buy a new one. But Carol was originally called The Price of Salt by obviously Patricia Highsmith. And this book was like highly controversial when it came out, because it came out at the height of the Hays Code, in which homosexuality wasn't allowed to be mentioned unless it was in a negative light. It's the reason why so many villains are always queer coded, why so many queer love stories end in tragedy, because of the Hays Code. Like for like 30-40 years, you could not publish a gay book unless it ended with like the people going back straight or like one of them dying. Like, it was real bad. And then Carol came out and it had a happy ending, and it was like one of the first books, if not the first queer book to have a happy ending. And I think the reason it was able to like make its way through is because the ending is kind of like ambiguous in a way, but like you can read it any way you want to, and most people read it as a happy ending. Like, this book broke so many rules at the time. Like, it was unlike anything else on the shelves, and yet it is completely timeless. You've got Carol, she meets Therese in the department store that Therese works at, and they just immediately have this connection. And Therese doesn't really know what being gay is. Like, in this time, like, you weren't raised being aware of gayness, but Carol, she definitely does. And they sort of start this relationship where Therese is kind of like discovering herself and what she wants. Carol's entire life falls apart around her because of her relationship with Therese, and everyone needs to read this book. Everyone. Literally every single person needs to read Carol. Also watch the movie with Cate Blanchett and Rooney Mara. Amazing. Oh, a book that is the blueprint. Do I even have it? Do I have it? I don't have it. I lent it to my best friend. I need to get it back off her. Gone Girl. Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn. The blueprint for mystery thrillers. Like, no book has ever done it like Gone Girl, and I will stand by that. Like, it is the pinnacle of what a good mystery thriller, psychological thriller book should be. Nothing else has ever lived up to it. I have never found another thriller that invoked the kind of reactions that Gone Girl got out of me. Like, I literally was reading this like audibly gasping. The plot twist in this book is the best plot twist that you could ever possibly write. Like, I'm not going to spoil it, but It's incredible. Also, the movie is really good. It's probably one of the better like thriller adaptations I've ever seen, but nothing does it like the book. And at this point, I feel like we're really coming into like my YouTube era. Like a lot of these books from this point onwards are probably books that you've already heard me talk about because I read them once I'd already started YouTube. But the first one, a classic for me, is The Killing Lessons by Saul Black. I know so many of you have read The Killing Lessons based on my recommendation. It is a truly dark, truly disturbing, is it police procedural? It's basically a Detective Valerie Hart, trying to solve a really, really messed up serial killer case. And this serial killer basically goes around and leaves things in people's bodies as like a clue. It's so messed up. It is honestly so fucked up. It is a thriller that's really stuck in my head for all of these years, and I've read a lot of them. Oh my god, Aristotle and Dante discover the secrets of the universe. Where is it? Where is it? Here it is. Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe by Benjamin Elire Sainez. You have definitely heard me talk about this book before. This book was the first like queer book or like YA queer book that I read, and oh my god, it has such a special place in my heart. When teenagers Aristotle and Dante meet one day, they have this like instant connection, but this book is set, I think it's set in like the early 80s, like mid 80s, and like their relationship, what it really is, isn't entirely clear to them straight away. They just know that they can't live without each other. They know that like they are meant to be in each other's lives in whatever capacity that is. And the writing in this book is just so unbelievably beautiful. The like familial relationships in this, a lot of the time with like queer books, it's really tumultuous relationships with their families, and that is not really the case in this book. I can't remember which one it is. One of them has like the most beautiful relationship with their dad and their mum, and it just like, oh, I read this at like a time when I was going through it with my parents, like with the whole gay stuff, and I just remember this like hitting me like right in the heart, like right where it hurt. You just feel every single word of this book, like every word, like it hits you right where it needs to. Call Me By Your Name by Andrea Esselman. I know this book receives a lot of heat nowadays, but I can't deny that when I first read this, like I just adored it. I fell completely and utterly in love with it. And I usually hate like movie covers on books, and this is the movie cover, but I just love this. I think this is so beautiful. I actually read Call Me By Your Name at the same time that I read Aristotle and Dante. I read these on holiday, and actually the next book as well, Tin Man, I'll get it out now. I read these all on the same holiday, and honestly it was such a great lineup of books for this holiday because they have all like really stuck with me. This book is set in the Italian Riviera. It's about 17-year-old Elio who forms this kind of obsession, this crush with his father's house guest, who is Oliver, and I think Oliver's around 23 years old. Hence the discussion around this book nowadays, like 23 years old, 17 years old, like it's kind of a questionable power dynamic and age gap. But this book explores their romance, how it like really slowly grows and what comes of it eventually, and how not every relationship is going to work out for everyone involved. And yeah, I read this book, I adored it. Don't bother reading the sequel. There is a sequel, don't read it. This book is where it ends. I'm just going to say that. Tin Man by Sarah Winman, more gay men, of course. For a period of time, I like couldn't find any sapphic books to read. Like, it is truly incredible how the sapphic book industry has boomed in like the last 2-3 years, because for years you couldn't find any queer books to start, and then you started to be able to find like gay men books, but there was nothing about women, and now there is. But during this like gay men era, I just read a lot of books about gay men. Again, this is another one that I've spoken about so many times over the years. It's another one that's like so short and sweet and just beautiful. How many pages is this one? 195 pages. Honestly, books are like less than 200 pages that stick with you forever. Like, there is something special in that writing. Like, you've got to be one hell of an author to be able to write that few words and for it to stick with somebody forever. In Tin Man, you're exploring the story of Ellis and Michael. They are childhood friends, like best friends, and more than friends. Like, their relationship blooms into something else, only this is like the 70s, 60s, 70s, and their relationship just like wasn't really viable. Like, they couldn't be together. So as they grow up, they grow apart, and then Ellis. Which one meets Annie? Ellis meets Annie, they get married, and they have like their own beautiful relationship, and then one day Michael comes back into the picture, and Michael's life has been very, very different to Ellis's, and this is set during the 80s. gay men. I'm not going to elaborate on that further. I'm sure you can figure out where this story goes, but it's so beautiful. I feel like I need to get better descriptive words, because I feel like all I do when I edit, I'm like, stop calling books beautiful. But these are books that I love because they are beautiful, okay? You get 10 points if you can guess the next book that I'm going to talk about. Yes, I'm in my jorts. Leave me alone. The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid, of course. I don't think it's a spoiler anymore to say this book is gay. Like, everyone at this point knows that Evelyn Hugo is a gay book. Like, when I first read it, I don't think I went into it knowing it was gay, and it was just like the greatest surprise of my entire life when I read that. This is the story of Hollywood starlet Evelyn Hugo. It is the golden age of Hollywood. She is in every movie. Like, she is like the Marilyn Monroe of this universe. And Evelyn Hugo has a lot of husbands over her life. Like, she is very well known for the fact that she has 7 husbands. When anyone brings her up in conversation, the first thing they talk about is how she had 7 husbands. Her entire narrative is based around the men that she married, the men that she was with. And in this book, Evelyn Hugo is now older. She's like nearing the end of her life, and she's finally telling her story as it really was for the first time. She's telling it to this journalist called Monique. And it turns out that Evelyn didn't really ever care for any of her husbands, because the only person Evelyn really cared for was her wife, Celia St. James. I think all the time about the amount of celebrities that are out there. Like, I'm not talking about like lesbians. I'm not talking about like lesbians that become celebrities because they're lesbians, like through social media. I'm talking about like full A-list, like Hollywood celebrities, and how none of them are lesbians. Like, there's very, very few. You can count on one hand the amount of lesbians are like A-listers in Hollywood. And I think about the lesbians that are out there, because they are out there, like A-list lesbians exist who are closeted and scared to live that life. And I have my theories. I have theories. I'm not going to share my theories, but I know they're out there. And I just think all the time about how like this story was probably real. Like, this story is probably the reality for A-listers right now and Hollywood starlets in the past, and it just felt real. Like, reading it, I was just like, Evelyn Hugo is a real person. I don't know who it is, but I know she's real. And then we have Sadie, a book told in the style of a true crime podcast. Like, yes, sign me up, I'm there. I feel like ever since I finished this book, I've been on the hunt, like searching for another book that reads like this one did, and I'm yet to find them. If you know of any other books, my tummy just rumbled. I haven't eaten yet today, I'm very hungry. If you know of any other books that are sort of told through the medium of like a podcast, please share them with me, because I need to live this again. So this follows podcaster Wes McCrae as he is out there trying to discover what's happened to Sadie. And Sadie's lived a pretty tough life. She grew up in this small town. Her best friend ever was her sister. She adored her sister. She basically raised her sister Mattie. And then one day, Mattie is murdered. So Sadie goes on this crusade to try and get justice for her sister. And in the process of doing that, Sadie disappears herself. And so in this book, you've got sort of 2 narratives that you're following. You're following Wes McCrae as he is like actively following Sadie, trying to find her. And then you've also got Sadie's side of the story as well. And Sadie is always like obviously 2-3 steps ahead of Wes McCrae. So you're getting like these parallel timelines, but one timeline is like slightly ahead of the other. Like, the way it's told is so clever. And yeah, if you know of any other books like this, it was great. It was kind of like Daisy Jones-esque, like, you know how that's all told through interview? Like, a lot of it is kind of like that. I just loved it. I feel like it's really fast. Like, reading books like this, it's just like really speedy. The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller, need I say more? Like, this book I genuinely believe is going to be a modern classic. This book is going to be something that students study in classrooms in like 20-30 years time. Madeline Miller is such a talented writer, and honestly, this is going to be blasphemous. I loved this book so much, but it took me a while to get into it. I read Circe recently. I did not like Circe. Sorry, I'm a plots girl. Like, I need a plot in a book for like me to keep turning those pages. Circe is just like a vibes kind of book. But this has like a balance of the two. Like, this has the vibes, but it also has the plot. There's things happening in this. And this is the love story of Achilles and Patroclus. This is based on Homer's Iliad. So Madeline Miller basically takes the story of Achilles and Patroclus out of the Iliad and makes her own narrative. And this book is just captivating. Like, it is literally just captivating. You can't put it down. The love story between them, it feels so real. And the ending, oh my god, the ending. I'm not going to spoil it. I'm not going to tell you. I'm just going to say you will cry more at this book than you've ever cried at anything in your entire life. Like this, oh my god, I'm tearing up even thinking about it, I can't. Delilah Green Doesn't Care by Ashley Herring Blake. Did you really think I was going to make this whole video and not talk about the Bright Falls series? Of course I was going to. I think I really latched onto this series because it was the first sort of like cheesy romance series that I'd come across that featured lesbians. It featured like sapphic women instead of just featuring straight couples. And when I heard about it, I was like, I'm going to read that, I'm going to devour it, this is going to become my entire personality. And that is exactly what happened. Delilah Green, also, I just love her as a character. There are 3 books in the series. There's Delilah Green Doesn't Care, there's Astrid Parker Doesn't Fail, and Iris Kelly Doesn't Date. The original Delilah Green is my favourite because I just love Delilah as a character. She's this like badass tattooed photographer from New York City who is basically estranged from her family, and then one day she gets a call to go back to her hometown in Bright Falls to photograph her stepsister's wedding, and her and her stepsister don't get on at all. And when Delilah's there, she kind of accidentally falls for Astrid's, her stepsister's best friend, Claire, and this is their love story. This book is like crazy spicy, but it also just has so much heart to it. Like, I just cared so much for these characters. I loved every single book in the series. Did you know that Ashley Herring Blake is starting another series, like the Bright Falls series, but like a different place? She is doing another series like this, and I kind of wish she could just continue with Bright Falls, but like, she had to end it somewhere. It's fine. I forgive her, it's fine. But I love this book so much. Who's sick of hearing me talk about this book yet? This is Last Night at the Telegraph Club by Melinda Lowe, and I know I harp on about this book all the time, but I will not shut up until you've all read it. Have you read this book? If you say no, I'm going to keep talking about it. You need to read Last Night at the Telegraph Club. This is the perfect intersection for me of like sapphicness, gayness, and history. It's queer history, and that is just right up my street. I wish like more people wrote books like this. Like, why? Where's the sapphic history? Where is it? 17-year-old Lily Hugh is third-generation Chinese-American living in San Francisco during the Red Scare in the 1950s. So all eyes are on like Chinese people all across the country, and Chinese people can't do anything to mess up. They can't do anything to draw attention to themselves because there's a chance that the American government will deport them. Doesn't matter if you're third generation, they will deport you. So Lily's got a lot of pressure on her to behave and just keep out of sight and just do the right thing, be a good daughter. And then she starts to realise that she's gay. She starts to fall for her friend. And this is a story of self-discovery, of her journey within herself, of navigating queerness, not only when you're trying to accept yourself, but also you're in a world where they don't accept you for being Chinese American, but also they just don't accept gay people. Like, it is legal to be gay. So Lily finds safety in a place called the Telegraph Club, which is like an underground queer club. Only, of course, queer clubs, gay clubs were illegal in this time, so they would quite often get raided by the police. And Lily finds herself one night at one of these raids, and her entire life just starts to fall apart around her. Read this book. Read it. If you haven't read it, read it, and then maybe one day I'll shut up. In a weird plot twist, after 27 fiction books, the last 3 books I have for you are all non-fiction, but there's no denying the impact these books have all made on me in the last couple of years. And the first one is Invisible Women by Caroline Criado Perez. I quote facts and figures from this book on an almost daily basis. Like, to anyone who will listen to me talk about this book, I will talk about it, I will bore your ears off, but also you need to listen to what I'm saying because this is important stuff. So Invisible Women is about data bias in a gendered world. So it's about how the patriarchy, how misogyny affects us to like the very, very core. Like, even data, like the most simple thing, is skewed by the patriarchy. As women, this kind of gendered data bias affects us in every single aspect of our lives in ways that we probably don't even notice. For example, there are kind of like 2 chapters in this book that really stick out to me above the rest. There's one about city planning, and hear me out. So city planners are most of the time men. It's a male-dominated industry. And so when men are planning these cities, they plan them with their own life experiences in mind. And I'm not saying these male city planners are planning cities in ways that are evil, or they particularly do it to like disadvantaged women. But when you have majority men in these positions of power, they're going to just go off their life experience, which isn't the female experience. So when men are planning cities, they plan with roads in mind, cars. Like, men are the ones in households who are more likely to have a car, to drive a car, to like be in control of the car. So when men are planning cities, they're planning it based around car journeys. Like that's why all like offices and like big skyrise buildings are in towns with all the roads leading like spokes into the middle of a town. But when women are planning cities, they're not planning with cars in mind because a lot of women don't have cars. Like most car owners are men. When women are planning cities, they're planning with bus routes in mind, public transport. They need to be able to get to the doctor's surgery, to the hospital, to local schools. And so the roads look completely different. It's so interesting. There's another chapter which talks about bathrooms, like public bathrooms, and it talks about equity versus equality. So at the moment, most buildings, they will design a building and there'll be the men's bathroom and the women's bathroom and they will be the same size. Only men, when they go to the toilet, they need 1 or 2 maybe cubicles and the rest are urinals, meaning you can fit a lot more urinals in, like a lot more receptacles for toileting in a men's bathroom than you can in women's. But women actually need more toilets. Like they need to spend longer in toilets with periods and children and the elderly, and we've got like clothes which are more difficult to take off and remove. So when a woman goes to the toilet, they're going to take longer in that cubicle than a man would. And because we've got cubicles and they've got urinals, we have less cubicles. So if you're talking about equity, a woman's bathroom should be a lot bigger, should feature a lot more cubicles than they currently do. Just go and listen to the book. I listened to it on Audible. I just highly recommend. The next book is incredibly similar, and again, it's one that I think about all the time. I kind of wish I hadn't listened to this, but I did, and it's in my brain now, and there's no denying how important it is, and that is Men Who Hate Women by Laura Bates. Laura Bates is a feminist who basically went undercover in these online incel forums, and the things that she learned are things which nobody should think. Nobody should know these things, but Laura Bates learned them, and now I had to too, and therefore you should too. You should do too? You should too. I've been talking for a very long time. My mouth is beginning to give up on me. As a side note, I'm deaf in one ear, so like I struggle to like enunciate my words anyway because I can't like entirely hear myself. But when I'm like tired or hungry or like I've been talking for a long time, I find myself struggling even more. So I get like quite slurry. Fun fact. So Laura Bates goes undercover to explore these extremist communities online, but it doesn't just begin and end with these forums online. These things, they seep out into everyday life. It starts in these forums, then it goes out onto the wider internet, then it goes onto the media, and then it seeps out into like everyday life for everyday people. And these men have got so much vitriol towards women, like so much intense, deep hatred. And it does affect us. Like even though you might not think that you come across incels in everyday life, like they are there. They're living, breathing, and they are watching you and they are hating you. This book will make you gasp, it will shock you in all of the worst ways, but I think it's really, really important reading. There's one chapter about how these incel communities kind of like recruit teenage boys, like young teenage boys, into their community, and then these teenage boys go into school and it all seeps down from there, and it is just horrifying, like truly horrifying. And we are going to end, of course, on The Stonewall Reader, an anthology put together by the New York Public Library about the events before, after, and during Stonewall, the Stonewall riots of 1969. Each chapter is the story of a different person. You've got all these massive names in the world of activism. You've got Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson, just to name a couple, and it talks about their experience in this time of life. It's not just about Stonewall, it's about like being queer in this time generally, and also activism in this time generally. I would highly recommend listening to the audiobook, because in some chapters it's literally just the original like audio interviews with the person who is speaking in that chapter. So like obviously in the book it's been like transcribed, but in the audiobook you're hearing the original audio and just being able to hear these people's stories, these people who like did incredible things, who are the reason why I'm able to sit here today in front of a camera and talk about being queer, talk about it so openly. Like these people are the reason that I was able to do that, and it's why I think it's so important to talk openly about being queer. It's why I've got the pride flag in every single bio that I have online, because I think it's so important to mark what these people were trying to do. Like maybe one day with the work that I do online, being an out and proud queer figure, I can empower other people, and that's what these people in the Stonewall Reader like did for me. And it's just like, it's the circle of life, the circle of gay life. Something that I found the most interesting about the Stonewall Reader is how all these people were like there, they were living during this time of Stonewall, and a lot of the recollections are of like the actual night in question, but everyone's got a slightly different story, and it really made me sort of like sit up and think about history and how, even though there's like, for a lot of historical events, there is like the accepted version of events, like this is what happened. For Stonewall, like all these people were there on that same night, they were living through it, but everyone's got a slightly different version of events. Like everyone lived it slightly differently, and that is what history is. Like there's no one accepted version of events of any historical event through history. There's everyone's different stories that all come together and form like this amalgamation of stories, and I just think that's beautiful. I feel like I'm not making much sense anymore, but please, if you're interested in queer history at all, listen to the Stonewall Reader. And if I haven't missed any books out, if I've counted correctly, they are 30 books that have defined my life in 30 years. If you've made it this far, please do leave a comment down below with maybe like 5 books that you feel have defined your life. Like everyone's got a different story, and I want to know what 5 books are your story, so please put them in the comments. And if you are new around here, if you enjoyed this, please make sure you subscribe to this channel, leave a comment, give it a thumbs up, interact with this in any way you can. I'm really trying to grow this channel. I want to be able to spread the message of queer books. I want to start to make a difference, so your help, your interaction on this will really do that. And maybe I might be able to afford a chair to go in the corner of this room, because I've been sat on the floor and my back is killing me. So if lots of people watch this video, maybe next video, I'll have a little chair. I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys.